Hello, good afternoon. A very warm welcome to everybody. I'm Cerin. I'm one of the many supporters and fans of Shrewsbury LGBT History Festival, which is now, of course, in its sixth year, but this, for the first time, is an online year. This afternoon's event is the 20th in the schedule of 30 events altogether, and there's still another 10 to go before the festival finishes on the 13th of March. So still plenty more for you to tune into and enjoy. Exciting and fascinating events and something for everyone. The festival celebrates LGBT plus History Month in the UK. And for centuries, we've lived in fear of persecution or prosecution. So many people made themselves invisible and still do in many countries. Uncovering and remembering our history gives us a place in our world and reinforces a sense of self and belonging. It shows how far we in the UK and in some other countries have come and how much needs to still be done to achieve equality around the world. The aims of LGBT plus History Month are remembering the past, celebrating the present, and creating the future. Really good aims. So before I talk about the event that you've tuned in to enjoy this afternoon, can I tell you just about a couple of forthcoming events that are coming up? Tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, we've got the Voices of Eswatini, a recording of the amazing people from the Eswatini Sexual and Gender Minorities Group, who are talking about what they're doing. Eswatini used to be called Swaziland. It's a small country to the northwest of South Africa. British colonial laws mean that homosexuality is still criminalised there today, and the group's aims is to change that, come what may. Also tomorrow at 7 o'clock, we are screening a film called Reel in the Closet, made using not seen before home movies dating back to the 1930s. We know we were always there, but these glimpses of our past show despite everything, we've always been a brave and fun-loving lot. The Reel in the Closet is so interesting because it feels very contemporary. It's really only just yesterday. Before the film this afternoon, there's going to be a short trailer for Reel in the Closet to give you a taster if you haven't already booked. So on to the event this afternoon. Peter Roscoe is one of Shrewsbury LGBT History Group, and for some years has explored different stories about LGBTQ lives in or connected in some way to Shropshire, be it Eglantyne Jebb from Ellesmere, Agnes Hunt from Church, Joan Lander from Wellington, or annoying incomers like Mary Whitehouse, who was a teacher in Madeley. Spurred on by the constraints of being locked down, this year Peter's written a short play, filmed on a freezing cold day in the quarry in Shrewsbury, but appropriate because it was the month in which Sophia Dubochet married the second Baron Berwick of Attingham near Shrewsbury. So let's see what it's all about. The film lasts about half an hour, and afterwards please stick around to see if you have any questions for Peter. I'm going to be hosting a question and answer session with him, and use the Q&A function on your device at any time during the film to leave a question for us to discuss at the end.
Hello, I'm Peter Roscoe and I'm one of the Shrewsbury LGBT History Group. I'm here today and it's a really freezing February wind, but the birds are singing very loudly around us, so that's really rather nice. My interest in LGBTQ history really has been ever since I came to Shrewsbury, which was in 1984. And the very first piece that I did a few years ago was set in 1949, and it was about a group of gay men from Shrewsbury, ordinary guys, who were arrested and charged with gross indecency. One was a clerk and one was a photographer. Terrible times, and it had a huge impact on the town at the time. Last year I did a short piece about Mary Whitehouse, who was a teacher at Madeley Modern School in Shropshire. She's remembered for her Clean Up TV campaign, and although was highly antagonistic towards LGBTQ people, in a way what she did in prosecuting gay news caused a great step forward. This year it's a story of a young woman told through the eyes of her husband, the second Baron Berwick of Attingham. Attingham is a big estate just near to Shrewsbury. I'll pop back after you've seen this short play just to say a little bit more, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
So, it has come to pass. Back home, we prepare for the great sale in this year of our Lord, 1827. In front of me, I imagine all the emptiness. My beautiful library cleared and all my books stowed for sale. Though, mindful of your visit, I have some old newspapers here and a volume I prefer not to touch, albeit hot off the press these last 2 years. At Attingham, there will be much commotion. Gentlemen, and even some of Shropshire society, are now strangely keen to be there and take their pickings from 200 or so lots. All but my family portraits under the hammer, but at least my beautiful Griselles are immovable. Hopefully, enough will be raised to satisfy my creditors and do right by my ever-sensible diplomatic brother William. As leaseholder, he now holds responsibility for the estate. Good God, he'll get to be the third Lord Berwick if he can. For me, a new life with my dear wife Sophia, in spectacular Italy, by Naples in fact. A sad day, but maybe I shall return one day. Though I say it myself, I have achieved much, and I'm only approaching my 60th year, and wearing well. I have much to be proud of. It was a shock when my father died. I was still just 18. Some may say I was not ready to become the second Lord Berwick. I was well provided for. Father had amassed fortunes. Nonetheless, time moves on. After my father died, I went on my grand tour. Switzerland, Germany, Belgium, but oh, Italy. Such wonderful things to discover, purchase and bring home. The guiding hand of my companion, my tutor at Cambridge, Edward Clark. He was my advisor too, a fresh young man like me. My first love was at this time, Lady Plymouth indeed. True, a married lady and not to be, but I always hold her dear in my heart and boasted too much about her. Pushed her away, I dare say, too eager to prove myself a man. Edward encouraged me on building my collections, antiquities, artifacts and books especially. They all became part of the wonderful transformations I made at Attingham. With Legate's Landscaping, we created an Italian idyll in Shropshire. Why, after all, the Severn is easily reconfigured to a beautiful lake, the Wrekin as Vesuvius if thought of carefully. Yes, I do mean that. And how marvellous was Nash's idea to reconfigure the crow-crowded Cronkhill farmhouse on the estate into an Italianate villa, no less. All a veritable Lorraine landscape brought to life. Of course, yes, it was a fortune spent, but I made Father's orchard bear abundant and exotic fruits. Turn Hall transformed. 8,000 acres of Attingham Park made resplendent. 300 acres of landscape grounds, but affected to seem to go on to infinity. Infinity. Though Shropshire is indeed beautiful, it is sometimes very tiresome, and I was glad of London and Brighton and their many diversions. My clubs sustained me in good style. White's, Boodle's and the rest. I believe White's still flourishes, and still no women allowed, though I'm told they begin to get everywhere 200 years hence. Dear Francis Walford was a tower of strength. Though still just a young man, I couldn't have had one stronger to mind and manage my estate while I was away. Choose your agents well. Though we are at odds now, he did warn me, be careful, it is not affordable. But, and a good marriage to my dear Sophia. She charmed me from the very first I set eyes on her. Mind, I had to pursue her. She was not easily won. Oh, and there, I see her. I shall always look after her needs, and I watch over her very carefully. How lucky I was to have someone so suitable to my needs. Yes, I accept that I made some miscalculations. But I am generous, yes, over-generous. But ask of my men or any of the house, I took care when they fell sick or were in need. When we demolished the village at Berwick Malvoisin to improve the view, all were well compensated. I could never say no to Sophia, and she did so love to spend in Shrewsbury and London. Yes, spend a lot. But it has indeed all led to this. Now I shall reside in Italy, maybe for good. I shall always think of Attingham fondly, though there are some clouds which irritate me, but they are there, and if I don't have a care, tarnish my memories of this landscape. People's tongues will wag, but what is it they say? Whatever, it is nonsense. The motives for my generosity are questioned. Yes, I like to spend money. So yes, I paid Edward handsomely for his time with me and guidance on the tour. There are cheats out there, and a gentleman abroad is seen by some as fair game. Edward steered me on a safe course and gave good counsel, as did Francis. So yes, I rewarded him well too. Some ask, did I really need to completely refashion Cronk Hill and allow him, a mere servant to me, to reside in such a splendid residence? Yes, it did involve some elaborate work, especially the plastering. But it shines warm in the sun, and he was delighted. I knew he was a fine fellow from the moment I saw him. A uniformed man playing in the band. Though troublesome, connections with His Highness eased his release from the yeomanry, though, being the man he was, he returned to his men some years later. A fine captain. Some make something of my occasional stutter and denigrate me and say that I am a shy man. I dispute this. I simply know when candour is the best course. Unlike my dear Sophia's sister Harriet, but more of her anon. So what that I enjoy dressing up in costumes from bygone days? Who doesn't? I'm delighted that, I think it's called the National Trust, have returned my portrait by Angelica as a young man to the drawing room. We all wore fancy clothes for a portrait. I think the cavalier look suited me well. Even better were my masks. Oh, and the grand masquerades. It is true, it allows you to be someone else entirely. What could be more fun for a young man in his 20s, his life laid before him? Does my disinclination to hunt mark me as a weak man? No, I made my own choices. One doesn't have to run with the hounds, even in Shropshire. My preoccupations were Attingham and Attingham, and my very good associates in London. My brother did indeed enjoin me as time went on to find a good wife. "Choose a wife of high rank," the bachelor said. He was right though. But I see nothing wrong in a gentleman waiting until he is 41 before such responsibility is taken. It amuses me that Francis should also wed the same year as I. Great minds think alike. And no, there is nothing sinister or amiss in my choice of Sophia. I know a number of esteemed gentlemen who have married courtesans, and no, they are not whores. Heaven forbid! And yes, I know that before I had the pleasure of her acquaintance, she had eloped with a viscount, and, as a girl, had many gentlemen and other admirers. All I can say is, quite simply, that from the moment I saw her, I was besotted. She was, and is, essential to my life. The arrangement was complicated, it is true, and involved large sums. Yes, the agreement brokered was an ongoing small fortune. And yes, houses in London, Brighton, and... It was cold in February, but that was of no consequence to a spirited 17-year-old. St. Marylebones is a draughty old place. So, just as well, only her father came to the wedding in London. Yes, that might seem a rather lacklustre celebration, but it was what was needed. And after, to Italy. Where else? 17 is a good age for a girl to marry, and she accepted her good fortunes, circumstances and wealth very well. And I believe Francis approved. It was the perfect arrangement. Her sister Harriet did her worst. To my horror, this so-called memoir is now displayed 200 years on in Attingham. This is what she said about dear Sophia, her own sister. She had begun her career before other girls even dream of such things. She had intruded herself on a cobbler at 13, thrown herself into the arms of the most disgusting profligate in England at 14, with her eyes open, knowing what he was, then offered herself for sale at a price to Colonel Berkeley, and when her terms were refused with scorn and contempt by the handsome and young, then throws herself into the arms of age and ugliness. That's me. For a yearly stipend, and at length, by good luck, without one atom of virtue, became a wife. I care naught that Shropshire society should think the arrangement likely to be unfruitful. So what that locals turn their backs? I have many friends from more enlightened places come to enjoy the ever greater wonders we created here and see the spectacles I lavished on dear little Sophia. You must see what we made. The French fashion of male and female dominated wings works to perfection, but that's the least of it. A particular jewel is my beautiful summer house located near the Walled Garden. I'm told lost and only recently rediscovered in the 21st century. The Purbeck marbled fireplace. Such a lovely setting in the woodland. Lots of privacy with a mischievous rear entry. Yes, midway between the hall and Cronk Hill. Handy for the garden lads from the bothy and their fruits we had there, which they tended night and day, Shropshire's first grown pineapples. Though the thought of the sale in England leaves my heart heavy, nothing will sully my memories of my hall and park. Magnificent! Though I will not miss at all those wagging tongues. Some even have gone so far, more so, I gather, 200 years hence from now, to suggest unspeakable things. Yes, talk of unnatural acts. Heaven forbid! I can make no sense of the news that 200 years on, such is spoken of so freely and even celebrated. Plus, gentlemen, I hear, marry gentlemen, and even ladies with ladies. Let us be clear about this. Any fellow with such inclinations would face the full force of the law, which is crystal clear. Unnatural acts are against the will of God, and transgressors face death. Or worse. Yes, worse than death is time on the pillory, disgrace and ruin. In such cases, it is not uncommon for the enraged mob to gather at the pillory, throwing anything foul or injurious to hand. Filth and curses fly, and if it's a Molly, she will die there. Oh, this is no matter for a gentleman to speak of, certainly not for ladies, though the newspapers are always full of it. A glance in the library is all you need. If you doubt me, here are some examples of many for you. In the year of my birth, 1770, Thomas Dunn, a shopkeeper at East Dereham, was sentenced to stand in the pillory there for an attempt to commit an unnatural crime and to suffer 6 months' imprisonment. Another. Divers persons at workshop in Nottinghamshire have been strongly suspected of assembling together to perpetrate with each other unnatural crimes to the dishonour of human nature and the laws of God and man. Last Friday, a discovery of these practices was made in a barn in the neighbourhood of Worksop, which gave so great an alarm to these sons of Sodom that they broke up and fled their country. 2, however, were taken in the fact. And more. On Saturday night, a man in a reputable way of business in Westminster was committed to Tothill Fields Bridewell for an attempt to commit an unnatural crime in St James's Park. The populace, especially the women, were so incensed against him, upon a supposition of his being an old offender, that the justice sent for a guard to attend the coach to protect him from their fury. And when I became of age, 1791. Saturday night at the Assizes for the County of Nottingham, a baronet, yes, a baronet, a titled man such as I, a baronet, whose name, out of respect to the feelings of his afflicted relations, we wish to suppress, was, after a trial of 12 hours, found guilty of an attempt to commit an unnatural crime and sentenced to 2 years' imprisonment in Nottingham Castle. And so on and on. From the time I met Edward, Francis, Sophia, even today, but enough. All stories for idle conjecture in the clubs of London, and much mirth too, generally. Jeremy Bentham is a man scorned, a voice for this sad state of affairs to end. At least, where the fellow is in such condition by nature as made by God. Obviously, not for those devils who choose such disgraceful behaviour. A man of such inclination by nature must construct a merry dance indeed if he is to lead any life. And there may well be gentlemen will spend fortunes on such a dance, but what a sham of a man he would be. Yes, and an ever-present blackmailer, memoirist, and the rest. I have digressed. Look about you when you see Attingham. It is beautiful, and I am a great man indeed. I put heart into the land through good husbandry. 200 years on, and you shall never know the half of it. And, even if you did, I dare say, who should care?
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim, for making such a wonderful performance of the Baron Berwick and bringing him back to life. His last words were, "Who should care?" Well, yes, who should care? Baron Berwick, you might say, was a very rich, powerful, privileged white man who gives a hoot about what happened to him. I agree, it is important that we also find other voices from the LGBTQ communities, but at the end of the day, I think whoever you are, wherever you are, if you have to live your life hiding, that's a pretty terrible state of affairs. I'm sorry that the Baron wasn't able to tell you more specifically about Sophia, but it is the way, I'm afraid, although we're finding out more, that the history that we have recorded is very much the history of the powerful, and although Sophia came into money, she was not a powerful woman, and in fact there's not that much material that you can find out about her, but I'm hoping in time other people will pick up and we'll get more of a full story of her. So you might want to know, well, what happened next? Well, the Baron didn't get to return to Attingham. He died more or less 5 years later in the place they lived near Naples in Italy. And Sophia at that time in 1832 returned to England, lived out her years in Leamington Spa in much reduced circumstances. Some people say she was pretty well in penury by she died in 1875 at the age of 81. Attingham, no Baron lived there for many, many years until the 8th Baron, so it was the last time really for occupation of the place and enjoyment of it. And from 1947, which was the death of the 8th Baron, the property ultimately was in the hands of the National Trust and transformed into what you are now able to see today. So what you could say is that I have taken a queer eye to the second Baron Berwick. I wanted to convey the lifestyle of people of his class at the time. I wanted to try and illustrate the impossibility for him to be open about his sexuality. Probably terms were very different toward the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, but whatever, it would have been virtually impossible for him to have acknowledged, even if he could to himself, that he was gay or bisexual, and therefore would have had to, as many people still do today, even in the UK, have done a very merry dance to have hid who he was. I did wonder if I should have made more of the horrors of the pillory and generally what did happen to LGBTQ people at the time, but hopefully you got the gist of the background against which he lived and what he would have faced. What he, I think, shares with gay men, even up to recent times, and certainly gay men who are from countries elsewhere in the world, is a huge sense of shame about who he was, and very acutely aware of the need to hide. And it's this sort of thing of hiding in plain sight, really, which I find quite interesting. And in a way, you know, it's no wonder we make such good spies, because of that need always to be on guard and on the lookout. And in some ways, trying to find somebody who is hiding who they are goes to the very heart of what LGBT history is about, because how on earth can you tell the story of people who not only hid, but probably very carefully hid their tracks, or even did things to confuse the record so that you couldn't even get a hint of them. The UK now is in a world that's changed considerably for LGBT plus people. Very much, I think, a change for the better, even in the years since I did my piece about the men in Shrewsbury in 1949. When I started out, I would quite often get asked for evidence to prove the sexuality of the people I was looking at. So when I was talking about Eglantyne Jebb or Agnes Hunt, people like this who are well known in Shropshire, there would be a demand for evidence, or even if I can give the evidence of sexuality, then the response could be, well, who cares, what does it matter? I'm not getting that now so much, so I think that's a real progress, and I think Attingham Park and the National Trust illustrate that, because they were tremendously interested in this story, straight away accepted that LGBT people are a part of history and a part of the history of Attingham in its whole creation. So I would like to just say now a big thank you to the National Trust, and to say do go to Attingham Park. It's a fabulous place, whatever you think about the resources and means by which it was built and came to be. It is a very beautiful place, and the National Trust have done a very good job. I'd also like to thank the filmmaker Hannah Quinn for, on a very cold February day, done all the necessary and all the hard work in editing it. And last but not least, of course, Tim Baker for his acting and hanging in there with it all. And finally, just to thank everybody watching. Thank you for supporting LGBT history in Shrewsbury, and let's look forward to next year. Who next? I've got a few ideas. Perhaps the Gay Switchboard, which was founded in 1976 in the Ambridge Gorge. Who knows? We'll see. Okay, bye.
Hello everybody, and welcome back, and thank you so much, Peter. What a really terrific piece of writing, really well performed, brilliantly performed, because I know how cold it was, by Tim, and a really fascinating little snippet and queer eye into that bit of history. Thank you so much. There's been a few questions. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to ask you those on behalf of the people that have put those up. But also I'd like to say that there was a lot of really, really positive chat in the chat. People saying congratulations to all involved, a fascinating story, very interesting, great performance, really informative, many thanks, totally engaging. So I think you can agree that everyone's enjoyed it. So congratulations, Peter. Thank you for that. So one of the first questions in the Q&A that is a really interesting one, actually. Do you have any plans, says this person, to offer the play to schools? It would be a great way to create discussion. What do you think?
Well, I'd be really flattered for the film to be used wherever, actually, and we've got two versions. One with me at the beginning and end, and the other just the film. So I hope anyone anywhere could use it. And the other thing I'd just say is that
I've come to learn with Zoom that however wonderful the recording is at the time, the live thing, once you put it through Zoom, you do lose something. So depending on your device, you may have had a bit of lag on the sound there, but that wouldn't be present in the link and the copy that we've actually got. So no, I think it'd be great, particularly in Shropshire, because it's a local story. Most people have heard of Attingham, and I think, yeah, hopefully it brings it to life, because there's this funny old gent from way back. And I like the whole, thing of, well, why should we bother about him in particular, really? He's
I
just
mean,
off,
that
wasn't
was
he?
that was a question to me, actually, from me. Well, why did you choose Baron Berwick?
Well, I'd been to Attingham, I think, about 15 years ago with Jeff, and they have a wonderful guy there called Martin who does reenactments of characters at Attingham, and he did the story of the second Baron. But I don't have a gaydar. I never know who's lesbian or gay. But even for me, as he was talking, I thought, hang on a minute, he pays this 17-year-old courtesan whacks of money for life.
Absolutely.
Something is a bit sus here. And then that just made me explore. So it was just really, it was Attingham itself that tipped me off.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked a question. Do you think that the need to hide your homosexuality was even more important for the upper classes, I presume, than the lower or middle classes?
No, I suspect it was pretty well a disaster, and probably too, if you were higher up the system, there might have been more ways and means of avoiding prosecution or being put on the pillory. Whereas I think if you were from the lower classes, say if any of the Boffy boys were doing what I insinuate, had they been caught, they'd have been out of the community. Well, just like the guys in 1949, really. One was worked on the railway, another was an engineer. I think they wouldn't have, even though those particular two weren't prosecuted, they'd have never returned to Shrewsbury to work. So no, I think it was, you probably had more means and the money to get away to Italy or France, I would imagine.
Yeah, and very much cover it up as the Baron did, using his substantial cash. Um,
Yeah.
Another question here, Peter. Do you have any other Shropshire stories to research?
Well, I touched on one of them, which is it's not actually in the Ambridge Gorge. I think it was I thought it was Carlbrookdale, but I've just done a little bit more digging, and I think the Shropshire, what was called the Shropshire Gay Switchboard from 1976 was actually started in a house by a very remarkable woman in Shrewsbury. So it might be really interesting to get a tale from the 1970s of trying to do that in a rural community like Shropshire. It's hard to put yourself back, but the lovely thing there is you've got some records of what the calls were about, and so you might really be able to, I just thought might be able to perhaps even do it as another little play, perhaps, who knows.
Or a radio play, even. That would be interesting.
Or and I
Yeah.
would say if anybody else is interested in exploring stories in Shropshire, let's go for it, because they are there. It's just you have to kind of dig around, really. Yeah.
Peter, the next question comes from a gentleman called David Bell. I mention him because other people have come up as anonymous, but David, thank you for this question. He
Yeah.
said, "Wonderful, Peter." And then he said, "Was London and Clubland a refuge for the rich and gay?"
I think, hi, David. Yes, I think I know David. I think that's a really interesting question, and I'm sure there's a piece of work to be done there, because my instinct is, yes, what a safe place to be. So you get away from London, you go to your gentleman's club, and yes, probably you have the money to pay. You can probably do all sorts of things. So yes, but a piece of work to be done. I was just interested to find out that White's is the oldest gentleman's club in the world, and then horrified to discover that it still excludes women from membership. And these places are like another world, really, for far away from the likes of us, but going strong still.
Yeah. Um, Thank you. A couple more people have just said in the chat rather than in the question bit that the monologue format worked really well. So could be applied definitely to other stories and other untold stories. And someone has also mentioned, I think it could have been Jeff actually, it's very good to have an LGBTQ story from a rural area, which I couldn't agree more with. There's one
Yeah,
final question.
sorry.
I'm sorry, Peter, beg your
No,
pardon.
I was just thinking there. I mean, the story of Eglantyne Jebb, um, and her girlfriend Margaret Keynes would be a lovely one maybe to do in a monologue way, because I think Eglantyne was such a wonderful character from what I've read of her. So a monologue there of her, because she was so in love with Margaret, but her mother and Margaret's mother kind of arranged things so that it could never be. And dear old Eglantyne then threw all her energy into a huge fight after the First World War to set up the Save the Children Fund. And whereas I think Margaret went off and got married because that's what she had to do. But I just love this line of her daughter in years to come, just wondering who would next be on Mamma's, which lady would next be on Mamma's arm when she entered the drawing room. So just two very different responses to the predicament.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Peter, someone has asked, how did you find out about the story and how easy was it to fill in the gaps? And third part of that same question, did you meet any opposition to it? I'm guessing that's in relation to the National Trust folk.
Yeah, yes. Well, yeah, as I say, found it through going to Attingham and coming across the wonderful performance that Martin did there. Um, Gaps, that's just a matter of research, really. You just have to dig around, read up, and get into all sorts of confusions then, because when you read up stuff, some people will say this, she died here in that date, and others will say she had, Sophia had, I don't know, 16 siblings when in fact she had 15, and oh, you get into all of that. But no, opposition, I meant it when I said really that I think there is a real seed change happening, because in years past I have had situations where volunteers connected to institutions in Shropshire have refused to take part. They've kind of said, oh, you're just, this is the gay lobby, and have walked away. And I'm hoping that that will happen less and less and less. And we recently had some exciting developments at the Ambridge Gorge Museum, where they're positively, recognizing that the whole story is about very much the Industrial Revolution in the Gorge, and a very male machismo sort of cast on it. But there were other people, other communities there, and let's find them.
Absolutely. Okay, oh, that's great. Someone was asking specifically about your sources of information, actually. You said you did a lot of research. What were your sources of information, Peter?
Well, it has been tricky with lockdown. So I've been much, much more reliant on Googling and doing stuff online, using the British Library. That's always a really good place to start. And they're incredibly helpful. I would really recommend the British Library. Join it. From memory, I think it's free, and their resources are terrific. You've also increasingly got more places now that have got LGBTQ archives. So like the Bishopsgate Institute in London is a real gem. And so, yeah, look around now. There are more and more places. I'd prefer, like the story of the men in 1949, to actually talk to people. So I'd left it far too late. So I was desperately scrabbling around, going up to any elderly aged gentleman I could find, saying, were you around in 1949? But in a way, I love those actual stories from people.
Yeah, that real living testimony.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
lived life. Not possible to speak to Baron Berwick though. Peter, a couple more questions. Yvonne has said that she's surprised that you couldn't find, sorry, not you, that Baron Berwick couldn't find a more suitable cover like Jeremy Thorpe did. Why do you think, she says, he chose Sophia?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think, well, you can let your imagination run riot, can't you? Here's a man who's heading towards, well, he's 41. His brother's on his case to get married, really wanting a nice lady from Shropshire, I'm sure. That's the last thing that he really wants. He wants someone who's going to understand who he is, and probably Sophia, I imagine, is certainly a woman of the world and knows exactly what's going on. So it suits her and it suits him. So I think at that time, that arrangement probably did work and financially worked really well for Sophia.
Absolutely. Okay, one final question and we'll draw this afternoon to a close. But someone is saying that in your introduction, you mentioned Agnes Hunt. Can you talk a little bit about her?
Yes, well, Agnes Hunt with Robert Jones, I'm sure many people locally will know, were the driving force that ultimately became the wonderful orthopaedic hospital at Gimbowen near Oswestry. But Agnes grew up in Baschurch. Her mother is an amazing character, well worth reading her autobiography, which if you buy it, you're helping the orthopaedic hospital, by the way, so do buy it. And do, if you have the misfortune perhaps to go to that hospital, it's wonderful, but do look at the portrait of Agnes Hunt in the main lobby. She cuts quite a figure. She's great. And yeah, her life, we'd have to call her companion, is Goody, Miss Goody. They were together for 30 years, living with Mum. I'm sure Mum knew the school. Mum was all there and back. And yes, they're buried together in the churchyard at Baschurch, which is a nice place to go if you want to have a day out and have a little view of where they are. That's a good thing to do. So yeah, and it was the two of them, again, very strong women who put in a heck of a lot of work to get that hospital off the ground at a time when women, certainly well, middle-class women, were not supposed to really do anything, perhaps a little bit of light nursing. And they just ploughed on. And she had polio, of course, Agnes, from an early age. So that was something to live with. And again, a mother to cope with, who was very dominating. But really spirited, lovely autobiography. Do get it. It's quite short. It's a great read.
Well, thank you very much for that recommendation. And I'm sure you've inspired all of us this afternoon with this historical look back. Perhaps just to finish by reminding people that tomorrow at 3 o'clock, it's the Voices of Eswatini. And also tomorrow at 7 o'clock, it's Real in the Closet. Really, really looking forward to that one. And so it just remains to say thank you very much indeed, Peter. Thank you to Mr. Tim Baker, his wife, who I know was on hand. Thank you, Bev, on the day, and to filmmaker Hannah. And good afternoon to all of you, and thanks very much for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Bye.